everyone, we're back to Najdorf and today we will see the line with bishop e3. So here we have the starting position of Najdorf and white plays bishop e3, the biggest line in Najdorf. Here are, of course, many choices for black: e5, e6 and knight g4, which we will see today. Bishop g5, h6, bishop h4. Here the move bishop c1 exists. And now knight has to go back to f6 and bishop c4. So the idea of bishop c1 is to go into Ch13 line, but with extra move h6 for black. And now we will see, is h6 good for black or bad for black? Of course, e6 here. After e5, which is Najdorf type of move, but when the bishop is already on c4, it is very bad to move the pawn to e5 and give the d5 square under control for white. Knight f5, bishop f5, ef5, queen c8, bishop b3 with very complicated position. But of course bishop c4, e6 and bishop b3. Knight bd7, castle. Instead of castle, bishop e3 might be played. Knight c5. This is very typical idea that knight goes to c5 and in necessary moment to exchange the bishop on b3 and have the e6 pawn completely protected, because we know from Ch13 line that in most cases this bishop on b3 sacrifices itself either on e6 or on d5. f3, bishop e7, queen d2. Normal, natural development, bishop d7, long castle, and here again black does not rush with castle because we have this move h6 here, which might be the problem after castles when white will attack on king side with g4 and h4, then the g5 will be with tempo and it's gonna be a big problem for black how to defend this h6 pawn or to exchange on g5 and give white the h file. But instead of castle, black has, of course, b5 with the plan to attack on queen side. Let's go back to castles, knight c5 and queen e2. Instead of queen e2, there is a very important move, f4. What if white rushes to push on king side and plays f4? Leaves the pawn on e4, but now we will see why it is good to have h6 pawn rather on h7. Knight takes f e4, knight e4, knight e4 and f5. e5. Now let's stop here for the moment and let's see that after a6, bishop c4, e6, bishop b3 and knight bd7, the other line which I did not recommend, but of course it's a good line and exists, castles, knight c5, f4 and here knight fe4, knight e4, knight e4, f5 and e5. After queen h5, queen d7, and white here has important square g5, because after bishop g5 the position is very complicated. But we see here that after e5, queen h5, queen d7, there is no more g5 square for white. So it turns out that h6 is in black's favor. But here queen d7 is actually very important, because if queen c7 and black wants to develop with comfort to have these squares open for black bishop, then there is knight e6, very unpleasant knight e6. Queen d7, bishop e6, and now queen c7. Now there is no knight c6 because there is already bishop on e6. Well, instead of bishop e6, if knight e6 anyway, then knight f6, queen h4, and f takes e6. So, after castles, knight c5, queen e2, just normal development with the bishop e7, and black is doing totally fine. Let's go to another line, well actually main line, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3, and bishop g7. Here white has two main options, which is bishop e2 to attack the g4 knight, and h3 to attack the g4 knight as well. Let's start with bishop e2. Of course, black does not want to retreat with the knight, so the main move is h5, bishop g4, and here I think that simplest is to take with bishop g4. Main is to take with pawn on g4, but there are insane lines, like for example knight d5, knight c6, knight goes to f5, bishop takes b2, rook b1, bishop a3. Now we see that this bishop is completely out of play. Castles, bishop c5, rook b3, and e6. Let's see one typical game. Queen a1, f6. This is okay for black, but it looks completely scary for me, because if I have the option of bishop g4, which is very simple, then why to go in these complicated lines? Knight f6, king f7, knight d6, bishop d6, knight g4, e5 to cover this diagonal. Queen d1 was played in the game, bishop c5, queen f3, king goes to g6, rook d1, queen e7. Let's just see this game very quickly to have an idea what is going on hg4. Of course, this is not the detailed analysis we are looking, but you can of course look in the PGN file. And rook b7, bishop g4, queen b7, queen e6, and this perpetual check was played in the game of McShane Velikitin. But let's go back to our line with bishop g4, and f3. Now bishop d7, bishop f2, knight c6, castles. And I want to take a moment here, because now white's just developed, and as black has the pawns already on g5 and h5, of course the main point is to push the pawns to g4 and h4. But what happens if black right away pushes g4. Black has to be a bit careful here because white has a very tricky move, knight d5. So what is the idea of knight d5? Because anyway, it can be kicked out with e6. But after e6, knight c6, b takes c6, and bishop b6. And we see that this knight on d5 is very dangerous because now the bishop attacks the queen and also the knight goes to c7 with double attack on the king and rook. So this is lost for black, and black should not get in this trap. So I like here the move which was played by Bolger. Rook b8, a very clever move. I think the idea is very obvious that black wants to push g4 so that knight d5 here is no more a big deal, because after e6 there is no knight c6, b takes c6, and we see that b6 square is completely controlled. So a very clever move. Rook b8 and queen d2. If bishop e3, now I don't see any problems with g4, f4 and h4. So black achieved what he wanted, but let's see what happens on queen d2. Queen d2 was played in the game of Xu Bolger, and Bolger here played bishop e5, rook a d1, rook g8, bishop e3, e6, and then the game was drawn. But I don't know what is the problem with g4. I mean, I don't see any problem. f4, h4, knight c6. If bishop e3, now it's time for the queen to be into attack. So queen a5 is very good idea to having the fifth rank and to see how can we go on with attack. But if knight c6, b takes c6, and a very nice idea to exchange the dark squared bishops here with bishop d4, bishop d4, queen d4, and now black can exchange the queens, queen b6, rook b6, with equal position. Okay, so I think this is the simpler and the simplest decision on bishop e2. And now let's see the other main move, h3. So now, of course, black cannot play h5, so he needs to retreat the knight to e5 and knight f5. If f3, then knight bc6, bishop f2, and bishop e6. This is the game of Karyakin against Gelfand, and Gelfand showed here a great understanding of position. Let's see. Queen d2, rook c8, completely normal development, castles. Gelfand took on d4, bishop d4, and queen a5. Now the king feels a bit safe in the center, so black doesn't have to worry about the king at the moment. Instead, Gelfand develops the queen with the idea of attacking the king side. Queen f2. If Karyakin is careful a bit and plays a3. Then black castles, and after h4 there is always g4, f4, and the square for knight on c4. Bishop c4, massive exchanges on d4 and rook c4. Queen e3, rook fc8, f5, and here we see the typical idea in Najdorf with rook c3. B takes c3, bishop d7, king b1, and queen b5, king a1, queen a5 is equal. Let's go back to the game. Queen f2, rook c6. So g3, obvious, because white wants to advance the f pawn and bother the knight on e5. Castles, f4, knight d7, h4, g4, knight d5. So Karyakin pushes a little bit, but bishop d5, e d5, and a great move here played by Boris Gelfand, a great understanding. He did not retreat with the rook, but rook c5 instead. And we see that he pushes the pawn on, puts the pressure to the pawn on d5, and if bishop c5 after knight c5, this is disaster for white, because we see how good is this bishop on the long diagonal and every piece is into attack. The queen attacks to a2 pawn, and also the rook will be into attack. And of course, black dark squared bishop has no opponent, so dark squares is in black's control, and it is very, very, very dangerous for white to be into this attack. So bishop g7, king g7, black has good advantage. But now let's see the main line. What happens after knight e5, knight f5, bishop f5, ef5, and development with knight bc6. Knight d5, e6 is the most precise move here, because if first castle, it might be okay, but what I don't like is that after bishop e2, e6, exchanges on e6, knight e3, d5, white castles, and after queen b6, it might be an okay position for black, but I really don't want to play this with black pieces, because after bishop h5 it controls the squares and white has more pleasant play in my opinion. But after knight d5, e6, f takes e6, f takes e6, knight e3, and queen a5 check. We don't need castle. Queen a5, c3. In this position, I won't go into details. I will just show how black continues to play, but for detailed analyze, of course, you can look in attached PGN. Knight f3, very good move. The idea is that after g takes f3, bishop c3, bc3, knight queen c3, there is no king e2 due to knight d4. And if queen d2, of course, queen a1, and after knight d1, queen d4, this is the case when rooks are better than two pieces and a rook. Why? Because black has many pawns, and the main point is the pawns on queen side, which can be very dangerous. So after queen f3, bishop c3. Of course, no, not bc3 because of queen c3. King d1, queen a4 check, king c1, sacrificing on b2, queen b4, and here are tons of games, and we will stop looking at this position in this video, but of course you have to look in attached PGN to understand how these games end in draw. Thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed it, see you soon.